I'll probably have to be reminded every single time. That's so far, that's what it appears to be. Anyway, so the question or comment was, is it possible, or can spiritual practice or involving ourselves with spirituality in one way or another, talking about boundlessness and there being not limitations, can it lead to a certain sort of narcissism? And I thought that was an interesting comment, an interesting question, actually. I would say that what this is ultimately about in the end, or not even the end, but at some point, it becomes very obviously not about you. So at that stage, which I would call liberation or no self realization, which isn't as bad as it sounds, but at that stage of things, it's not like it's absolutely impossible for there to be selfish motivations or selfish actions or behaviors. They're still possible, but they dissolve pretty quickly. The set of beliefs, impressions, and conditioned behaviors that revolve around a central belief that I'm separate from everything and thus more important than everything in a certain way, has taken a critical hit, for sure. It's basically seen that that paradigm was flawed from the beginning, always was. It's a very paradoxical thing to talk about, because at the same time, the body mind still has selfish interest. It still is wired to survive. And to say it's otherwise would be an error. But it's certainly nothing like narcissism. It's, you find yourself hyper acutely aware of how you affect everything and how everything is affected by your behaviors, even the subtle behaviors. It's kind of, in a certain sense, it can be disheartening, because you realize how deep the delusion of self goes, how pervasive selfish habits, selfish beliefs are in our conditioning. And the disheartening part is that it seems like it would take 100 lifetimes to clear all that out, in a way. Although you also know simultaneously it's not something you have to do, because there's no you that's holding it together. There's a great relaxation that comes with this as well. The sense of doership falls to nothing or almost nothing. And if it's felt like there's a doer, it's momentary. It's a momentary arising in thought. Flow is experienced as the underlying truth of reality, of phenomenon, even if there can still be contraction. So it's just a very, very different way of moving. But at that level, or that stage, I would say, which is not necessarily a progressive stage, if anything, it's a regressive stage. But at that stage, there's certainly not a risk of narcissism. It's quite the opposite in a very real way. With that said, if the conditions are right in an individual, I think that even after an awakening, or even more so after an awakening, in the right person, in the right situation, circumstances, they can, the ego can kind of have one last hurrah. It can co-opt the whole thing, but it can do it in a very dramatic way, and it will look very much like narcissism. And there have been and are spiritual teachers out there who function that way for a while. Ultimately, I think it will collapse, hopefully, because the students realize this is nonsense and that sort of thing. But there have been some very, very popular teachers who I think are moving in that way. They've had an awakening, a very real shift, in consciousness, a very real shift in identity, but we're not willing to let go further, and not willing to let go of the universal sense of I, the identification with all of being. And you can imagine how that could become very egocentric if you're really unwilling to let go of the ego. Instead of being this fractured sense of a self just trying to survive in the world, I'm the whole world now, I'm everything. And you can see what that can do if the ego structures of the mind are just not willing to let go, right? That means I can do anything, and that means I am in control of everything. And at best, it's kind of like a law of attraction thing, like I can decide anything and manifest it and make it happen. That's kind of the best case scenario of that co-opting. The worst case scenario is you literally become a cult leader, and that's a dramatic thing to say, but it's actually true. Like that's how cult leaders occur. Now, that's definitely a wrong turn in the realization process. That's what happens there. I'm not saying every cult leader out there has had some sort of awakening, but I imagine they're all pretty clear in certain ways, and people can pick up on that. And then they have narcissistic and even antisocial personality traits. So they learn to use the language of whatever, love, unity, et cetera, just to manipulate people, right? So some pretty rotten human tendencies mixed in with some sort of clarity that people can feel, you can pick up on, and you can maybe in subtle ways point to some sort of clarity. And so that's can be a bad combination. So certainly there are pitfalls that can occur where this could become narcissistic, right? I'm pretty careful when I work with people to avoid those kinds of things. And I think often what happens, how that can happen is somebody has an awakening or something close to an awakening or some deep shift, and then sort of just takes it upon themselves to discount all teachers and all teachings, and they just sort of feel like they're enlightened, I guess is the way to say it, and they believe it. And then through these, if they have the manipulative enough personality, through these manipulations and validation and interaction with people, they get people to believe it. They're the most enlightened one, and their followers believe they're the most enlightened one, and then they compete for their attention, and all this nonsense happens, right? So I think that's a reasonably rare case to that extreme, but it does happen. So to answer the question, yeah, it could lead to that, but it's not the fault of realization. It's not the fault of reality. It's the fault of the human delusion is what it is, right? Because obviously there are tremendously manipulative people out there who have no spiritual realization either. That kind of narcissism is, reasonably common in the current world. So even in political leaders and so forth. So I don't blame narcissism on realization, but if you have narcissistic tendencies, you certainly can build them into some of this realization process, and sort of use the clarity you sort of achieve early on, I think. But I would just totally recommend against doing that. In the end, it's fine. Everything takes care of itself. But it's such a sidetrack. It's such a dead end. And you'll get yourself into a place it's very hard to get out of. So I usually sort of recommend people always keep a very healthy respect for the forces of delusion after awakening, especially, and continue to point to areas of unconsciousness. It's very important to do that, and continue the emotion work, continue the shadow work. This movement I'm talking about is sort of ignoring the deep shadow work to keep those ego structures going, and then to even amplify them with any kind of spiritual realization is to really ignore the deeper suffering in us, and so I think it's important after awakening, especially, to be willing to go into where you don't want to go, right? Because with awakening, often there's a very enjoyable honeymoon period, a a moment in your life, which can be weeks to months or even longer, where it feels like there is no conditioning anymore. There's just flow. It's very fluid. There's the weight of suffering and resistance is just gone. You can't find it. And you know that in natural reality, it's actually not there. And yet the human tendencies will start to come back. They'll seep in through the cracks. The conditioning that had caused that which is seen during realization, during awakening, to be obscured for so many years. So it's very important when that starts to happen to step up to the plate and face it and experience it and incorporate it and admit it and be humble, and instead of ignoring it and deciding you're enlightened and you're a guru now and whatever. You can take care of all your unaddressed desires, whatever. I mean, so it's just better to trust. Really, the simple message that would be said to you in Zen after an awakening would be, this is the beginning, not the end. It's really, and it really is. I mean, it's the beginning of true realization is an awakening or a shift out of a seeming individual identity into a sort of universal identity, into pure being, pure I, unlimited sense of self. That's just the first movement. Is it necessary? In most cases, it seems to happen, but nothing's necessary. This can happen anyway. I do work with people who, at least from their perception, they haven't had an awakening at a specific moment. They don't remember a big shift, although they might have had one and they just have sort of forgotten about it somehow. But the people I've worked with that kind of started from the beginning, they all seem to go through it. But it doesn't matter. It's not something to get hung up on, the awakening, the initial awakening thing. But there is a shift that occurs. Whether it occurs slowly or quickly doesn't really matter. But once that shift has occurred, once we start to really perceive a more universal self, a more universal identity, a fluid identity, an identity that may be so thin we don't even recognize it as identity. It's just beingness, or a very a completely undeniable sense of I amness that incorporates everything. When we have those experiences, when we have those, not experiences, you can have an experience of it, but when the realization is that, when the realization has literally moved into that, the identity has dissolved from a discrete identity into a universal identity. It's a very clear shift. Once that has occurred, it's important to recognize that the work has really just begun, and that there's a little bit of bad news, and that bad news is the bliss of the honeymoon period won't really last forever, and we can't expect it to. It's just an experience like everything else. So a willingness afterward, or once we've been on this path for a while, a willingness to be uncomfortable, to be raw, to really just let the moment open us again and again, pays huge dividends. It's probably the most important quality to cultivate, I think, in people. It's a humbleness. You're not God, you're not a guru, forget all that. They're all just ego structures. A true guru, a true sage, someone who can truly transmit living truth, will not have an identity as a teacher, a guru. They just won't. It doesn't work that way that I've seen. So just be willing to let go of all identities, because all identities are limited. All identities have history. They all have conditioning built in. They're not your deepest truth. They're not the deepest truth of the moment. So just let it go. Let things go again and again and again, moment by moment. And let whatever needs to come into consciousness to, let's say, integrate, to heal, to incorporate, whether it's an emotion, whether it's something you don't even know what it is, but it's even disturbing. Let's let that come, because why? It's already there. By this point, we know nothing new comes in. Realization doesn't bring new pain in. It just brings those unconscious places into consciousness, right? there's some magical world that you live in when there's complete unconsciousness, where you just don't see the violence you perpetuate on yourself. And then that goes out to the world, goes onto others, onto your environment, all of it, right? Now, I'm not saying this to make anyone feel like a bad person or guilty. We literally all share this. Literally, all of us, all humans share this because we share human consciousness. But to be unconscious of the deeper motivations, the repressed emotions, the fears, the doubts, to be completely unconscious of those parts of ourselves will result in violence of some sort. May not be physical violence, but it will be some sort of disallowance of what is real. Really, when violence, what I mean here, it's not such a judgment. It sounds judgmental, but it's not a judgmental thing. It's more like the violence is just dissecting out pieces of what you really are, ignoring your vastness, ignoring your infinitude, and ignoring that infinitude goes beyond anything that feels like a self anymore. It's that vast. It's that unknowable, indescribably close, indescribably vast. So if we're willing to just plumb those depths naturally, then you will be shown all these obstructions, that which prevents that from happening naturally. Because realization is natural. Enlightenment is not a state. It's not something someone achieves at all. It's literally just a word for the case, natural reality. So then all the business we are up to after some level of realization or some level of awakening is seeing what obscures that, seemingly. What can make that which is blatantly obvious, alive, vivid, here all the time, make it seem like not the case? What can make me feel isolated? What can make me feel small? What can make me feel like I'm struggling against anything? What is it that does that? What are the belief structures, the ego structures? What are the resistance patterns? What parts of myself, what parts of the energy system moving through this body am I out of contact with habitually? And I'm putting effort into remaining out of contact with those. That's work that can be somewhat fearful, uncertain at first, but you realize the dividends it pays are huge, because all you really want to be is what you are. Anything in the universe really wants to be is exactly what it is. And what that is when it is itself, when it is exactly what it is, goes beyond anything that the mind can conjure or imagine. It is boundless, truly. It has no beginning or end. But we have to incorporate all of the obstructions. We have to investigate what prevents this clear seeing all the time, clear seeing from within, clear being. And what I find is they are often things that are accessible in the emotion body. Someone put a note here. Yeah, I am recording. And someone said, just came up to say, obscurations are clearly seen in their obscuring clarity. Absolutely. The obscuration is the knowing of obscuring. Yes. The knowing, knower, known are not two or three, not one, not two, not, nor is. And any distortion or obscuring aspect is only to an agent that wants to be what it already is. To clear up a mud puddle, it's best not to continue stirring. Absolutely. Yeah, that's very well said. This is pointing really at what I'm saying is these obstructions, obscurations, they are themselves clarity. They are themselves, to talk from the other side, there is nothing hindering anything anywhere. There's nothing but clarity. But even that's not even a limitation. Unclarity can be clarity. It's fine, easy. But the process to move through from the perspective of the agent, right? To just say there's no agent is fine. Say there's no self is fine. But to the self, to that which darn well feels like a self or an agent, that can really only be captured as a belief for a while. And then you can start to sense into it as experientially. But you can't deny the agent. You can't deny the self. Or again, you're just trying to bypass the whole process. And that's what we're talking about here, is finding the way to learn from anything that occurs in this moment, anything that's felt in this moment, and learn from it. What are we learning? We're learning its okayness. We're learning that it has every right to be here, and it's not better or worse than anything else, including shame, fear, including resistance. We approach, the act of acceptance, the act of love, of even self-talk, self-parenting, when these feelings come, these moments come of shame, self-abandonment, the talk of welcoming that. Welcome, you're welcome here. You have my attention, you have this space. Shame, if that's what's here. That's important. It's a movement toward, and what it really is doing, it's not saying that shame needs to be incorporated. It's not saying that shame has been kicked out. Shame has no problem with being shame. It's fine. What it's doing is reversing the tendency we have to avoid it. That's what we're sort of embodying a broader bandwidth of love and acceptance by talking to, and then contacting, and then sitting in and with the energy of shame. That's on our side. That's all happening on our side. The shame side is fine. When you go into what the shame is, into the core, or helplessness, when you're at the core of helplessness and there's no resistance to it, it's wonderful. That's the treasure chest. That's what you've always been looking for. Okay. That's the clarity of obscuration is just the case. But when we feel like we are still on a side, when we feel like I'm still someone who's navigating this territory, skillful means are helpful, and they're important, I think. So it comes in steps a lot of times. And the first step is just recognizing that's what's here, that there's a little bit of shame here. There's a sense of I'm not good enough, or there's not good enough. You might have to look for it in the story first, and then you kind of see, oh, it's actually an emotion. Then you can see, oh, it's a feeling in the body, but I can see where that block was preventing me from actually feeling it, like a wall, right? It was such a strong tendency to move up into the head that I never was able to drop down into the body in those moments. And then you start to feel, oh, this is what shame is, or this is what non-acceptance of self is, or some people would call it self-hatred even, self-judgment. Now we can say, oh, that's what that is. That's self-judgment. That's what that energy is. That's what that movement is. Then we can start to parent it and, accept it, open the door to it, because we've been closing the door to it, not by any choice really. And even we're not a guilty party because we learned to do that behaviorally. We learned resistance patterns behaviorally. No one told you, okay, when you feel this emotion, then this is how you avoid it. That's not how you learned it, right? You just learned by behavior, by movement, by communication with other people. Parents usually started out, but with any connection we have within humans. So we learned it behaviorally, so we never actually learned what the emotion was fully. So now we're learning to accept it. We're learning to go into relationship with it and tell it, it's okay. You can be here. You have my attention. You have space here. And then the next step is contact. Like you start to physically feel the contact. And at some point it's non-dual contact. And then when the resistance pattern drops out, then again, that's that's when you realize, oh my God, I've been running from the one thing that I've always really wanted. I've always really just wanted to reconnect with the entire universe. But the way to the entire universe is through your suffering, because that's the one place you're cutting yourself off from the universe. My suffering, your suffering. I don't want to feel other people's suffering. I don't want to feel my suffering. That's the place we're avoiding. So that's also your contact point with all of reality. If you're willing to navigate this terrain, then I think you're at very little risk of becoming a narcissist, because there's nothing in this. It's about narcissism is about control. It's about controlling everyone's attention and putting it on you all the time. And every human can feel a little bit of that. We all kind of know what that is, right? Some of us more than others. But when it's replaced your entire personality, that's narcissism. And so when you're trying to control everybody else's attention and project an image into their minds of how great you are, what you're doing is completely avoiding anything that you feel. That's what you're doing. You're using that ability you have to manipulate people. You're using it to avoid contact, right? That's why when you look at a narcissist, they look so miserable, right? They look like they're just struggling constantly. It's not a comfortable way of moving, and no one around them feels comfortable. Everyone feels uncomfortable. What you're feeling is the repressed emotion. So if you're willing to just make contact with emotion, you're fine. It's not gonna be a problem, yeah? Now, not everybody talks about this in this way, I'll tell you. Like some people would say, oh, I don't feel any emotions, and I've had deep realization and all that. And that's fine. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying they probably just don't use the language I use. But I don't know how anyone could not go down through the body, like through the physicality of being a human, which does come with fears. It comes with terrors. It comes with anger. That's part of being a mammal. You can't not have those deep, deep drives, in my opinion. So they may go through them and just not talk about them that way or whatever. But I just use the word emotion because it's the easiest generally to relate to. So yeah, I would say the key after some realization, or certainly after awakening, is to open yourself to life. Let life be the teacher, which means moment to moment, to the degree you can, be the receiver and an acceptor, and just see what's happening here. Is it a sensation? Is it a sound? Is it a thought, a belief? If it's a thought or belief, what's the belief? What belief is operating here? Oh, the belief is like, I'm not busy enough right now. I should be doing something I'm not doing. Oh, okay. Well, what is that related to? A sense of not being enough, a sense of I'm not quite enough, so I have to stay busy to be enough, right? I would call that a little bit of shame, a little bit of I'm not enough, whatever. So it's always shown to us in the moment. The path is, after awakening especially, it's not a path of bliss and light. You might have experiences of those, and that's fine, but it's actually a very rocky path. It's a very meandering path. It's unpredictable. And that's fine. That's totally fine. There are good practices that can help us along, and good pointers and good people who can point. But so much of it is about really just becoming truthful about what's actually happening here. If you can do that, it's pretty hard to get too far off course, because life is the best teacher in the end, I've found. And you really have to trust life to find that. I love what Gary Weber said. Gary Weber is a super scientific dude. I mean, he's a research scientist and has a bunch of research labs and a huge research budget. And he noticed that the thoughts in his mind caused all the suffering, like the blah, 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 talking in the mind all the time. He realized that's not necessary. So he went to figure out how to get rid of it, how to undo it. And he's a super scientific dude. So he's like, I wanted something empirical that I could test, that I could see results that worked. So he just looked around and he found Ramana Maharishi, and he started asking, who am I? Then he started asking, where am I? And so forth. And I think he did a lot. I think he did a lot of practice with that. He did a lot of yoga and other things. But he said he got to the point at some point where he said, I knew I could just instinctually tell I couldn't go the next step. I couldn't go beyond myself. Like, I don't know why I knew that, but I knew it. And he said he went to Gangaji and he asked her, and she said, well, pray then. And he said, that's what I did. I prayed. And the prayer was a prayer of letting go, like let something else come in that can release what I can't release. And he said, and I just let go. And he said, the more I let go, the more I was held by life. And the more I let go, the more I was held. The more I let go, the more I was held. That's a perfect way of saying it. It's a trust you can't fake. But what's so beautiful is when you trust it, when you can let go in those ways, life shows you what it is. It's fabulous. It's amazing. But it's not on your program. Okay, that's the answer to the narcissism comment. Yeah, faith. So this comes from the Xin Ming. It's a long piece of writing. It's beautiful. It's like probably one of my top favorite. But someone made this quote from it. Faith and mind are not two. Non-duality is faith in mind. I'm going to read the Xin Ming now because I love it so much. It's also called, the translation is affirming faith in mind. I will tell you that mind, the way I use the term mind is not the same way that Buddhists, especially old Buddhists, use the term mind. They used it with a big M. Okay, I'm going to read it here. The great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. When preferences are cast aside, the way stands clear and undisguised. But even slight distinctions made set heaven and earth far apart. If you would clearly see the truth, discard opinions pro and con. To founder in dislike and like is nothing but the mind's disease. And to not see the way's deep truth disturbs the mind's essential peace. The way is perfect like vast space where there's no lack and no excess. Our choice to choose and to reject prevents our seeing the simple truth. Both striving for the outer world as well as for the inner void condemn us to entangled lives. Just calmly see that all is one, and by themselves false views will go. Attempts to stop activity will fill you with activity. Remaining in duality, you'll never know of unity. And not to know this unity lets conflict lead you far astray. When you assert that things are real, you miss their true reality. But to assert that things are void also misses reality. The more you talk and think on this, the further from the truth you'll be. Cut off all useless thoughts and words, and there's nowhere you cannot go. Returning to the root itself, you'll find the meaning of all things. If you pursue appearances, you overlook the primal source. Awakening is to go beyond both emptiness as well as form. All changes in this empty world seem real because of ignorance. Do not go searching for the truth. Just let those fond opinions go. Abide not in duality. Refrain from all pursuit of it. If there's a trace of right and wrong, true mind is lost, confused, distraught. From one mind comes duality, but cling not even to this one. When this one mind rests undisturbed, then nothing in the world offends. And when nothing can give offense, then all obstructions cease to be. If all thought objects disappear, the thinking subject drops away. For things are things because of mind, as mind is mind because of things. These two are merely relative, and both at source are emptiness. In emptiness, these are not two, yet in each are contained all forms. Once coarse and fine are seen no more, then how can there be taking sides? The great way is without limit, beyond the easy and the hard. But those who hold to narrow views are fearful and irresolute. Their frantic haste just slows them down. If you're attached to anything, you surely will go far astray. Just let go now of clinging mind, and all things are just as they are. In essence, nothing goes or stays. See into the truth true self of things, and you're in step with the great way, thus walking freely, undisturbed. But live in bondage to your thoughts, and you will be confused, unclear. This heavy burden weighs you down, so why keep judging good and bad? If you would walk the highest way, do not reject the sense domain. For as it is, whole and complete, this sense world is enlightenment. The wise do not strive after goals. The foolish put themselves in bonds. The one way knows no differences. The foolish cling to this and that. To seek great mind with thinking mind is certainly a grave mistake. From small mind comes rest and unrest, but mind awakened transcends both. Delusion spawns dualities. These dreams are merely flowers of air. Why work so hard at grasping them? Both gain and loss and right and wrong, once and for all, get rid of them. When you are no longer asleep, all dreams will vanish by themselves. If mind does not discriminate, all things are as they are, as one. To go to this mysterious source frees us from all entanglements. When all is seen with equal mind, to our self-nature we return. This single mind goes right beyond all reasons and comparison. Seek movement, and there's no movement. Seek rest, and no rest comes instead. Seek rest, and when rest and no rest cease to be, then even oneness disappears. This ultimate finality is beyond all laws, can't be described. With single mind, one with the way, all ego-centered strivings cease. Doubts and confusion disappear, and so true faith pervades our life. There is no thing that clings to us, and nothing that is left behind. All's self-revealing, void, and clear, without exerting power of mind. Thought cannot reach this state of truth. Here feelings are of no avail. In the true world of emptiness, both self and other are no more. To enter this in true empty world, immediately affirm not to. In this not to, all is the same, with nothing separate or outside. The wise in all times and places awaken to this primal truth. The ways beyond all space, all time. One instant is 10,000 years. Not only here, not only there, truths right before your very eyes. Distinctions such as large and small have relevance for you no more. The largest is the smallest too. Here limitations have no place. What is not, what is not is. If this is not yet clear to you, you're still far from the inner truth. One thing is all things are one. Know this, and all's whole and complete. When faith and mind are not separate, and not separate are mind and faith, this is beyond all words, all thought. For here there is no yesterday, no tomorrow, no today. So even when there's no now, what is there? Where are you going to go? What if you've never gone anywhere? What if nothing's ever happened? What if there's nothing to act upon anything else? Too close. What if the act of making contact does not include the one who's making contact? There's just that act. There's just contact, so there's no act. Nothing leaves anything else, so nothing needs to return. Nothing needs to be corrected or brought back into alignment. If there's malalignment, there's malalignment. That's perfect. Perfectly that. You've never moved a millimeter from your true nature, nor could you. True nature can't move away from true nature. Deep samadhi, the sound in the room, they're not two things. Your true nature has no preference between a profound state of meditation where the sense of self is completely dissolved and taking one footstep. Those aren't essentially different. When nothing has value, when nothing has assigned value, then everything is expanded to infinite significance. So now there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to attain, nothing to find. There's no outside, no other side. If there's movement, then body, mind, universe is the movement. Exactly. And that equals sum total 0 because there's no deviation. There's never been deviation. What I read was called Shin Ming, Hsin Ming. It's interpreted also in English as affirming faith in mind. There are several transcriptions of it, transcriptions. Your confusion is Buddha nature. Exactly. There. No need to enter it. No need to understand it. Wake to it. It already is. You could never leave your true nature. You can't make distance. And when I say your true nature, I'm not talking about a realized state. It's the feeling of your tongue in your mouth. The pressure in your head. The ring in the room. It's perfect and all-pervading. It transcends life and death, but it does it as exactly what it is. Exactly that sensation, without deviation. Is the portal to what is beyond life and death, beyond creation and destruction. There's no conditions required for realization, because all conditions are realization. Nothing's going to rearrange itself to make enlightenment occur, because the rearrangement is enlightenment. The rearrangement is living truth, movement, stillness. There's no true nature to get back to. There's nothing that's left it. The sense that something has been lost or mishandled or misplaced, that feeling itself, the sense, all of its component parts are Buddha nature. They're vivid, luminous presence. Exactly there. When the obscuring mind calms enough, we know this entry point intuitively to the stillness. Um, but if we're able to see from the side of stillness, and it's not a seeing, I just don't have a way of saying it, then it doesn't actually matter whether the mind is still or not anymore at all. The mind can move in and as stillness, because it's seen nothing can make distance. The mind could be thought of, the conscious mind could be thought of like two mirrors that are in opposition and they're moving slightly, and it creates a sense of distance. But that's only through the reflective nature of those mirrors. Nothing ever moved. Nothing ever has to move. And thus no movement is hindered. The stillness is somewhat like infinite contact. But not in three-dimensional space. That's still an image. The image of three-dimensional space seems to spread everything out. This is radically intimate. No distance. No distance in that sound. No distance in the tingles in the toes and fingers. But even that no distance isn't limited by the description of no distance. It's a sort of complete contact with everything that is and everything that is not, with all movement and all stillness. And it's not somewhere specific, not centered. So unhindered movement, unhindered reality, even unhindered in the phase of being, non-being. Every part of the wave at once. Okay, we're gonna ding early.